Welcome to Rational Discourse Weekly. It is November 19th, 2012. I'm William Garrison, and this is my co-host, Michael Aune.
Hello. We are here today to talk about something that was sparked on Reddit with a conversation that William had with someone in the Christianity subreddit about whether or not religion and spirituality are innate to human nature. And then we're going to delve into whether or not that is a justified belief, maybe how that belief has come about, and whether or not it's ultimately a good thing.
So stay tuned. So this week, I had an interesting conversation with a gentleman, actually in the Christianity subreddit, which is a subreddit I've been following recently.
I like how you called it a discussion, though.
Well, basically, he shut me off to the discussion. It started with an assertion that, or a claim that he made, that spirituality or religion, as he put it at first, was innate, and that scientists had found it to be healthy.
Yep.
I was basically refuting that claim or saying that he was full of crap, and was basically asking for, maybe I didn't start the conversation in the best way.
Let's preface this way. When I read it, I told Billy, maybe we should tone this down, which is something I think we could both learn from a little bit here. But
but sometimes emotion gets the best of us, I think.
Well, and so, to be fair, he was making, at that point, at least an unfounded claim insofar as he had not provided any supporting evidence.
Yeah.
Which I think is what sets you off.
I basically asked him, where specifically it heard it. That stemmed into a conversation. He was claiming that this particular professor at Oxford University had done a study that had collaborated with 40 other individuals and basically said, yes, like spirituality and religion are innate.
Now, to be fair, he had said specifically that religion was innate, and I think that was the catching point that you jumped on, was
that no study that we have ever heard of. And, we're pretty active on the internet. We read Reddit, we read news sites. I'm active on Google Plus and Twitter. Yeah. So this was news to me.
And we can't,
He was basically positing that
he provided a name for the gentleman who I guess had led the study.
Yeah.
But after a fairly intensive Google search on William's part here, we were unable to locate said study or anything referencing the study.
I had found a lot of information from him talking about this particular professor. Talks a lot about the brain in particular. He talks about religion. He talks about spirituality. But I couldn't find the study that he had specifically linked. But then we had a slight disagreement about the difference between religion and spirituality, because it's one thing to say that religion is innate and is healthy. It's another to say spirituality is innate and not even mention that it has any health benefits, which is the only thing that I could find.
Yeah. We need to be careful about terms here, because, spirituality even is a fairly vague term.
Yeah.
Now, if you're just talking about the fact that people generally maybe are prone to the sort of emotional responses or physical feelings that might be associated with, let's say, a spiritual moment.
Yeah, almost like an out of body thing. Things that aren't tangible, experiences that you can't necessarily put your hands on. And when you have an emotional reaction to those, I think that's all the studies that I could find was just talking about those kinds of experiences. The fact that even from birth, we have a tendency to gravitate our emotions toward those experiences. But that goes. You were telling me earlier about the studies that had been done under an MRI, or
the fact that you could reproduce. And again, I'm paraphrasing something that I had read online, so take that for what it is. But basically, people were placed inside an MRI, and certain areas of the brain were activated through, electrical stimulation. And the end result was that when certain regions were stimulated, people had what they described as a spiritual or religious experience, whether it was a feeling of oneness with the world or feeling the presence of another, which was a common one, I believe, where they felt that someone else was present with them, but not physically, like an angel or a spirit or a God, whatever they interpreted it as. Um, and so, in a sense, going back, yeah, okay, maybe we can acknowledge that there is a physiological way to explain a spiritual response.
Yeah.
That's different from saying that religion is something that is innate to people, because first of all, making the jump from spirituality to religion is a very big jump, because spirituality, again, very, very vague term. Religion, also very vague, because religion, in a sense, is meaningless without defining what religion you're talking about. I mean, are we innately Christian? Are we Protestant Christian? Which of the Protestant denominations are we? Are we Buddhist?
And I think most religions would jump to say that they're the correct one, that all babies are born,
Catholic.
Protestant or Catholic.
Yeah.
And
to be fair, some of them do believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's necessarily a lie from their perspective, but it is something that, by making such a claim, saying anything about religion, you're making a very broad statement that is either meaningless because you haven't defined the terminology you're talking about, or is very, very specific, which means that we can now have a very pointed argument about exactly what you mean. So, are all babies born Catholic innately? Is there an inherent part to the human brain that triggers, some sort of acknowledgement that transubstantiation is in fact a true dogma? Well, okay, we could, in theory, test that. I mean,
well, let's
we can
say
trigger a response.
Let's dumb it down and hypothetically say that humans, and studies haven't shown this, by the way, but let's say that it has, that humans are born to believe that there's a higher being that controls our universe, that created us, that cares about what we do and who we sleep with, how we sleep with that person, that sort of thing. Even if our brains are wired that way, that doesn't necessarily make that claim true. That doesn't. People believe some crazy things sometimes, and that doesn't mean that they're true.
Well, I mean, you're talking about, with the human brain, you're talking about the most complex physical object we have ever analyzed as a species. Nothing comes close. The most advanced supercomputer is nothing compared to the brain of an 8-year-old child. So, I mean, we're trying to explain something that we are very much at the beginning stages of understanding. Yeah. So you've got to be very, very careful about the claims that you make about anything regarding the brain and any of its attendant features and experiences that you might have based on certain experiences or certain stimuli or anything like that. It's also really, really dangerous to say anything about an object that complex, especially if you aren't willing to maybe take a look at the explanatory reasons why that would make sense. So although we don't understand the brain terribly well, especially at the very minute level, we sort of have language centered down, and we have your reason up front and your reptilian brain is in the back and all that. We get the very basic structures of the brain. But as far as why we are wired that way, there are many, many reasons why. Maybe we tend to have, let's say, a spiritual impulse. I've read before that we are very, very intentional creatures. So we read intention into things that don't necessarily have intention. So I'm walking through the woods, and a tree branch moves unexpectedly, and I can't necessarily see the cause. My gut instinct is to assume that there is a reason why the branch moved. And if I feel that it's threatening, maybe it did it to me. Maybe it did it at me.
That's what I was going to say. Most people would assume that if you saw something move and you don't know what moved that object, that I'm going to die. I think the human...
There is the impulse to think that everything is trying to kill you.
And
which makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, because, well, you probably, by being a little bit more paranoid than the next guy, had a slightly better chance of not getting caught unawares when that thing actually was trying to kill you. And so I think, that intentionality thing, Richard Dawkins talks about this a bit in The God Delusion. And he's talking about that would give the rise to the sort of animist viewpoint of the world, which was the idea that spirits imbued physical objects, because it explained why things happened, And it was because things had goals. They were attempting to achieve X, Y, or Z based on what the spirits intended. And it seems that that is something that would make sense coming from an organism that is constantly on the defensive from things that might be trying to harm it. Which plays into the whole spirituality feeling, because if now we're sort of led to believe, based on evolutionary pressures, that things are out to get us, or that they're moving with their own sort of intention that we can't necessarily explain. Well, now we've already sort of assumed that there are other consciousness, multiple conscious.
Yeah. Well,
what word would that be? I've never actually done the plural. Consciousnesses, whatever. The multiples of that word. I'm about to learn something. Apparently,
I'm only finding consciousness, which is singular, or maybe it's also the plural.
So I'll have to investigate that one. Apparently, in any case, there's the idea that the world is imbued with others, mental agents that are out there working towards their own goals. Yeah. Well, now you've already basically provided, in a sense, spirits. You've given rise to a worldview that accommodates immaterial objects that can't be easily explained. Okay, now you've sort of formed the foundation for a more advanced belief system, which maybe gives rise to a pantheon of spirits. Maybe you have a hierarchy of spirits, and now some of those spirits have primacy over the other spirits. Those can basically roll into your gods.
Well, and let me interject to see if I think I know where you're going with this line of thinking. It seems to me that humans almost have an innate need to describe the world around us, and when that includes things like the creation of the universe, and which we think led to the creation of a religion in the first place, it's because if we don't know how to explain something, we do it with an immaterial object.
Well, I think it was the idea that before you had a causal explanation, before we had modern physics and we understood the way before we feel the world works, I mean, obviously everything's up to be disproved, that made the most sense at the time.
Yeah.
Because, you're going by the data that you have at hand. I have a brain. I have a mind. They didn't even know, brains weren't a thing. They simply had a sense of self, and that sense of self drove this physical body that I have to do certain things.
Yeah.
Now I see something else out there moving. Well, why is it moving? Well, I move because of what my mind, this weird object that I can't really describe, made my body do. So maybe this object is doing it for similar reasons. So again, you've now imbued an object that you can't necessarily prove, but you've given it a mind. You've given it goals. You've given it a purpose of its own. And it's a way to explain the world that at least makes a measure of sense based on the evidence provided at the time. So now the idea is that, again, you've introduced other minds to other things.
And we're talking like caveman times.
No. Again, this is, in a sense, this goes, my cat, I can tell when they're sitting by the door and a leaf blows by, you can almost see them hunting it, but also analyzing it like, what is it doing? Is it out to get me? Am I safe to attack it? Is it gonna they're analyzing in a sense and obviously they're not self-reflexive probably in the sense that we are.
Right.
But what is it about? What is it doing?
Is it going to kill me?
Yeah.
Before I kill it.
And I think that same drive is what led us to analyze the world in the terms that we can analyze ourselves. Immaterial mind that we can't really explain or understand causes this physical thing to move around and do X, Y, and Z. I see my friend over here doing the same thing. I assume he has a mind. I can't tell, but he seems to be reacting the same way I would. We can have conversations. There's evidence to support. He has a brain.
I am a robot.
Some of the time.
In the future, it'll be very hard to tell, is what I was trying to say, is, we're going to have people walking around that look human.
So you're saying you're not yet an android, but you very well may be in 50 years.
I may be they may implant my brain into a robotic body.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah.
Do not crush me with your
We've seen the
robotic
movies. We know how those end. Will Smith is in danger, and
bad things happen to good people.
he kicks some ass.
It's true. Anyway, the idea, going back to our topic, is that the drive towards intentionality, the drive towards imbuing intentionality towards other objects, based on the observations that we have of ourselves, where we have intentions and goals to do things, and that creates movement, that creates action in the world. We see action happening over here. We see intentionality. We see a goal-oriented person or an object. It's a very easy move then to basically say, well, what motivates me is this thing. And this thing, we'll call it a spirit or a soul. Now, this is all very abstract, and it's not like these people are thinking this in the terms that we are. But if I move because I have the soul, and if this is moving, maybe it has a soul.
Yeah.
But obviously, you can, if it's an animal you're going to eat and you cut it open, you don't find a soul. You don't find a motivating principle. You don't find the object that causes this thing to move with that intention.
You find food.
Probably some blood and some guts too.
Yeah.
But
Well, early humans, might have drank that up.
That's true. It probably was
we
more
take in
food
food differently these days.
Yeah, we're a bit more selective, I'd say. No cow tongue for me, thank you. Well, the point is, as this explanatory framework is trying to be built, because I think our brain is wired to try and explain the world so we can survive better within it, more efficiently, as it were.
Well, not only survive, I've read some interesting things talking about one of our main drives is the drive to fit in. It's one of the reasons why we're social animals. It's that innate need for us to bond with other people.
But that also, that falls back. You have to make assumptions on almost like the golden rule.
Yeah.
I'm making assumptions on why I should be nice to you. You should be nice to me. I have these beliefs. I can't tell if you have them, but I believe you do. So you're gonna act this way. So all these assumptions are being made, and they help us survive. And so as time goes on, especially as culture advances, you've got a bit more time maybe to analyze, why is it that the tree moves? Well, folklore and the various systematic beliefs that maybe you grew up within start to form more of a cohesive story. And that story becomes a foundation for a spirituality that can maybe in a sense be passed down. It's not that just that there's a spirit within the tree. The spirit has a name, and that spirit has a particular goal. And now we should respect this spirit, and now this becomes a sacred grove in the woods. Something like that. All these little seedlings, as it were, can sprout and become the foundations of a religious system. Well, if it's sacred, how should we act towards it? Are there rituals that we should perform? So going all the way back to the original point of the fact that religion might be innate. Maybe. But only if you're willing to stretch the definition of religion to basically cover this whole subset of prior assumptions and steps that basically says you can go from the sort of basic instinctual impulse to believe that other objects act because of a mind or a spirit of their own.
A soul, yeah.
That can very easily be developed over time into a more concrete belief, especially within a culture as more people come into this. And eventually you have just the basic seed that will become and sprout a religious tradition. It doesn't take a whole lot. You need very little to start a story. And as people embellish and bring in their own beliefs.
To start a story, to start a system of ideas, I think the main thing that we're trying to prove or mention here is that ideas are very, once they have a following, can become very powerful. I mean, that's one of the ways you can explain how many different religions exist in the world. Obviously, they have completely different set of rules, regulations, tenets. Their holy books are completely different. Their explanation,
upper level phenomena are different. But in a sense,
the explanation for the
very
the
basic
universe
beliefs can be shared. Belief in immaterial objects, belief in a foundational principle, a creator. Why are we here? I think it's a very basic question. Well, you've already postulated spirits and souls. Maybe there's a spirit who's responsible for the creation of the world. All those sort of things tend to tap into the same basic mythologies that people are out there. They all have the same fundamental elements. The specifics change.
Yeah.
So is it Osiris, Dionysus, or is it Jesus, or is it Mishra? Well, that's all irrelevant in a sense. But the idea is that the impetus towards religion might be innate. But it's so many steps removed from the actual causal explanation that to say that religion is innate is very inaccurate, or at least disingenuous, because you're making so many assumptions and steps from what's actually causing it. And that in no way states that it's a good thing. At this point...
Or that it's true.
Or no, yeah, there's no truth in... I mean, truth is not a democracy. So it doesn't matter if everyone in the world believes that the world is flat. We know it's not. We know it's round. And so at this point, it doesn't matter if everyone believed it, went about their day, and we just acted as if that was the case. It does not make it the case that the world is flat. And so, the fact that something is commonplace, and the fact that maybe you can find a good justification for why people tend to believe that, in no way proves that it's a valid viewpoint to hold. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to get across, is that ignoring the specifics, because again, we haven't been able to track down maybe the specific study.
I'm still looking.
In a sense, if we find a link, we'll post it with the article or with the podcast here.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it doesn't matter. And I think that's what we want to get across, is such a conclusion is so basic and so tiny in its implication. If you can even just say that the spiritual impulse is innate to human beings, as we currently stand in our evolutionary trajectory, you have essentially said nothing, especially about the impact of religion and its importance in the modern age, and whether or not it's something that we should keep around. And I think that's a line of attack that is often thrown at us, saying, well, so many people are religious, there must be something to it. We're not saying that it's not something that people tend towards. We're saying that maybe it's not something we should ultimately give ourselves to. And I think that's the point. And I think that means it's time.
That just happened.
Sign from God.
It is. And that's the voice of God you're hearing.
But that's all we've got for today. And
thanks for joining us. And until next week, happy Thanksgiving. And cheers.
that's good.
I wouldn't shoot you in the face.
It comes afterwards.
That's good.
Yeah, on purpose.
It's temporarily a reply.
Right, but no.
Thank you.
It comes after the